And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. I'm David Hines. It's Wednesday evening, and this evening, of course, we are going to be continuing our series on the Constitution and the courts. And last week, as you know, we dealt with the issue of judicial review and the role of the courts as an arena of social justice, an arena of the struggle for social justice. We had attorneys at law, Roysdale Ford and Mayor Robertson on, and this week we are going to continue that discussion. We're going to be looking at Article 13 of the Constitution of Guyana. And as you know, Article 13 has been in the public domain for quite a while. People have been making reference to it. And in fact, there's an organization that has taken the name Article 13. And it's the article in the Constitution that speaks of inclusive governance. And as you know, as constitutions go, a lot of these principles in the constitutions are not spelled out. They're not enumerated. And so a lot of times it's left to the courts to interpret what these articles in the Constitution really mean, what the intent of the framers is the term they usually use. What did the framers mean when they talk about inclusive democracy? Sometimes courts take a minimalist reading of these aspects of the Constitution, and sometimes they take a very broad reading of these articles in the Constitution. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight with my guest, Nigel Hughes, who's no stranger to Politics 101. He has been here several times. And tonight, for the first time, we're going to have Mr. Ralph Ramkattan, former PPP member, now leader of ANOG, a New and United Guyana, one of the parties that emerged before the 2020 election. Ralph Ramkattan, of course, was the Speaker of the National Assembly at one time. And his importance to tonight's discussion is that he was part of the constitutional review process that occurred just over 2 decades ago. As you know, coming out of the 1997 election, the two parties locked horns. The PNC had taken to the streets, claiming that the elections were rigged, and what we had was a standoff, and we had CARICOM sending in 3 esteemed gentlemen, Sir Sridhar Ramphal, Sir Alistair McIntyre, and Sir Henry Ford of Barbados. They came in and got the two sides to sign the Hurd-Munson Accord. And part of the Hurd-Munson Accord was the provision that there should be constitutional reform. And it was out of that that we had the process of constitutional reform beginning, I think, in 1999, and going on up until 2001. Ralph Ramkattan, along with Haslin Paris, were the principals as I remember it, in that process. And so in a sense, Ralph can be seen as quote unquote one of the framers of that reform. Article 13 of the 1980 Constitution had talked about the principal objective of the political system of the state is to extend socialist democracy by providing increasing opportunities for the participation of citizens in the management and decision-making processes of the state. That was amended. That was amended in the constitutional reform process that I alluded to 2 decades ago. And it now reads, the principal objective of the political system of the state is to establish an inclusionary democracy by providing increasing opportunities for the participation of citizens and their organizations in the management and decision-making processes of the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making directly affect their well-being. So, socialist democracy was done away with, and inclusionary democracy is now in its place. And if you notice, the article was, in a sense, expanded to be a little bit more specific than the one in the 1980 Constitution. And during that time, in the lead up to the constitutional reform, the issue of power sharing, which was later renamed shared governance, I still use power sharing because I think it's much more precise than shared governance. Power sharing was very much in the air because we had reached a stalemate in which it had become obvious again that neither of the two major ethnic groups was prepared to be governed by the other, and neither party, the parties representing the two major ethnic groups, was prepared to work under or cooperate with the other. And so therefore there was an expansive conversation in the media, among political parties, among the elites, and I think it had gotten down among the masses. The PNC, which had not come out for power sharing before then, in 2002, just before former President Hoyt passed away, the PNC came out for power sharing. I remember President Hoyt saying power sharing is an idea whose time has come, and he was one of the persons who really resisted power sharing. And the PNC put forward their position on power sharing. The PPP had begun to walk away from power sharing at that particular time. They had championed power sharing before. So the whole notion of inclusionary democracy was very much in the air. And they had consultations across the country. I remember following those consultations very, very closely. At that time, I lived in Washington, D.C., and I remember being part of a group that organized some consultations on constitutional reform. And at most of the consultations, people showed a preference for power sharing between the two political parties. And by the time it got down to the process, I think neither party wanted to go as far as putting power sharing in the Constitution. So I always felt that this inclusive democracy, Article 13, was influenced by that, but it was sort of a compromise short of real power sharing. We'll talk to our guest tonight on some of these issues. So welcome to Politics 101. Whether you're joining us from Guyana, whether you're in the wider Caribbean, in North America, in Europe, in South America, we always tend to forget lots of our people are there in Suriname and French Guyana, some of them in Brazil and Venezuela, are tuning into these programs. I want to welcome you all. We have people on CAMS TV, people joining in on Politics 101, and there's also a group of people who join us on YouTube. We always tend to forget you people who are joining us on YouTube. I want to welcome you to Politics 101. Our discussions on this program are aimed principally at encouraging critical analysis, critical thinking, information as a means of liberation. You know, people I know are frustrated, and many people say that, you know, we engage in too much of talk, and I understand that, but there is a difference between talk and discussions. Talk and information sharing and gathering, or gathering and sharing, critical analysis, critical thinking, because we live in a society that is dominated by political parties, and we know that political parties are in the business of giving information for the purposes of voting. And so therefore, one may argue that at the level of political parties, there's not the encouragement of thinking outside the box. And so we feel that it is very important. It's very important for a functioning society, a functioning democracy, for people to be properly informed, for people to have a sense of what is happening around them. Last night, we had a discussion on a poll that was released, an opinion poll that was released by the International Republican Institute, the IRI, and we managed to get through part of that poll in a very lively discussion last night. And we are going to continue with part 2 of that discussion next week, Tuesday. But one of the things that came out in that poll is that people did not have as much information about basic things like our Constitution. In fact, 40% of the people felt that they needed more information about the Constitution. I think about 13 or 15% felt they needed information on the Representation of the People's Act. A lot of the issues in the Constitution and the Representation of the People's Act came up during the elections, 2020 elections. As you know, the two political formations took to the courts, and the courts played an important role in the outcome of those elections. And as happens, whenever you have an institution that is so prominent at a given moment in the motion of a society. Elections, everyone is tuned into elections, whether they vote or don't vote. And those 5 months, people were gripped to what was happening. And as I said, the courts were very much part of that process. And so things like the representation of the People's Act, the Constitution itself was referenced. And you find that people's interest in the Constitution would have gone up. People's interest in the representation of the People's Act would have gone up. And that's reflected in that poll, that 40% of the people felt that, or feel that they want to know more about the Constitution. They want to know more about the representation of the People's Act. And so that is part of the exercise, the civic part of our education. When I was going to school, we still did civics. Today, I don't know that that is part of the education system. And so these things, such as the articles of the Constitution, become important. Article 13 of the Constitution, as I said, has to do with inclusionary democracy. What does that mean? What the founding fathers, well, not the founding fathers, what the framers of that amendment to the Constitution 2 decades ago, what were they thinking? As I said, the issue of the sharing of power, was very much part of the discourse at that time. I was part of that discussion, and I rather suspect that that may have influenced them to move in the direction of some kind of inclusionary democracy, as opposed to the socialist democracy that was there before. The article speaks about the participation of citizens and their organizations in the management and decision-making processes of the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making that directly affect their well-being. And that reminds me of Sir Arthur Lewis, the St. Lucian Nobel Prize winner for economics, West Indian. He gave a talk on democracy in West Africa. I think it was 1965. And that has been reproduced in a small book. And it is seen as one of the more important documents that deals with the question of democracy in plural societies. Plural societies like Guyana, ethnically plural societies like Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, this part of the world. And in Africa, of course, we know that they have their issues of ethnicity, what they call tribe there. And Sir Arthur Lewis argued that there are two types of democracy. There's formal democracy that talks about institutions. Formal democracy, of course, is defined as a system where you have periodic elections and you have functioning institutions. There's the rule of law. But Sir Arthur Lewis argued that there is another kind of democracy, substantive democracy. And he defined that as those who are affected by decisions should participate in making those decisions. He was arguing that the winner-take-all system, in which the winner makes all the decisions and the loser does not participate in a real serious and active way in making those decisions, is not fit for plural societies. And it was his argument for power sharing, in which he says all those who are affected by decisions should participate in making those decisions. As I read these words in Article 13 that talks about organizations in the management and decision-making process of the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making that directly affect their well-being. I see echoes there of Sir Arthur Lewis. Welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link and let everyone know that we're on tonight and we're discussing the Constitution. We're discussing Article 13 of the Constitution. We'll now go to our panel. Mr. Nigel Hughes, who is no stranger. I call him the busiest lawyer in Guyana, and I noticed in recent times he's been doing more than lawyering. He's taken an active interest in sports. And you know, the thing with us Caribbean people, my students ask me that all the time. How come you all are lawyers and political scientists, but you all probably are more interested in sports and music than your areas of expertise? And I often have to explain that the nature of the society meant that the people had to operate at several levels at the same time. Yeah. And we take that into our education and our wide interests. Nigel, welcome again to Politics 101.
David, good night. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Thank you. And Mr. Ralph Ramkattan, as I explained earlier, Mr. Ramkattan is a former Speaker of the National Assembly. He was very much part of the constitutional reform process 2 decades ago. Prior to that, he served on GCOM, if I'm not wrong. So his resume goes back. His resume is quite diverse. Of course, he's at present the leader or the chairman of ANOG, one of the newer political parties, having spent all his life before that in the People's Progressive Party. And of course, he's a senior counsel. Mr. Ramkattan, welcome to Politics 101.
Thank you very much, David. Nigel?
Hey, Ralph, how are you doing?
Good.
And Ralph, since you have seniority here, and it's your first time, you'll have to take the new ball. I'm sure you played cricket when you were at school. I don't know whether you're a batsman or a bowler, but we'll give you the opening spot tonight to take the new ball. This is not the era of the Marshalls and Garners and Roberts and Holden, so you don't have to bob and weave too much because the opening bowlers are slow to medium or medium to fast, not very fast. Article 13 of the Constitution, really, in a sense, what we have in the article is really an amendment to the original Article 13 in the 1980 Constitution, which talked about socialist um, uh, uh, socialist state and socialist democracy. And the new Article 13 talks about inclusionary democracy. As someone who was there, what is it the framers were thinking when they made that change from socialist democracy to inclusionary democracy?
Well, you might not recall, but if I may refresh your memory, there was a big push at the time for shared governance, for a structure in the Constitution. It wasn't worked out by any of the advocates for shared governance to be implemented somehow in the Constitution. Um, the PVP officially had officially been advocating that for many years, but Cherry Jagan had just died. He died in 1997. This process was in 1999. So the advocates of shared governance were a bit were no longer had the strength of Cherry Jagan behind them, and shared governance was very much his baby in the PPP. It was something that he had had initiated. He devised the program. You remember the 1997 Patriotic Front program? It's no longer it's a historical proposal now. It's no longer it would no longer be acceptable in the current term. But he was the person who had pushed it. But he left. He passed on in 1997, and there was a group in the PNC, including the current leader of the PNC, Aubrey Martin, who had latched on to this Jagan idea, and they ran with it, and they got a great deal of traction from the PNC and from society as a whole on this thing. A lot of you remember them. A lot of the younger people showed low. Um, 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 Ovid Norton and Vincent Alexander and a whole group of them. And what happened was Desmond Hoyt allowed them at the conference to give evidence officially uh, to support shared governance. By that time, of course, the PVP was no longer interested. On the commission itself, you had people like Miles Fitzpatrick, Rupert Rupnarayan, and a few others, including the late Derek Bernard and so on, quietly, who supported shared governance, but not being able to get their way. The inclusionary governance was a consolation prize. So that is how Article 13 came about. But it was not only Article 13. It's a whole load of parliamentary commissions and constitutional commissions with secretariats, with functions, a human rights commission with functions. It's a vast it's a vast array of structures within the Constitution, all designed to promote inclusive governance. Unfortunately, nobody since 2001, in 2001, about 2001, around that period, the reforms were implemented. That's all that happened. They were just put written on the paper in the Constitution. That's it. Very little has happened afterwards to push. And Article 13, the organization itself, I try to write a little bit in the press and so on, urging them that the idea is to push we should be pushing the PNC, APNU, to be pushing the government to implement these programs and these proposals and these bodies and to have them function. Now, government's not interested in these things. Government's not interested. I know there's a big complaint about information in relation to the gas to shore and information in relation to Amila Falls and the oil and so on. Which government gives information willingly? Which government? Either the American government, the Swiss government, the Nigerian government, the Trinidad governments don't give out information. You have to extract it. So they don't give out information and they don't push the implementation of these things unless people are on their backs. And unfortunately, the opposition has not been pressing for these proposals to be implemented. Imagine we have a human rights commission in the constitution since 2001 and there is no human rights commission. Nobody's pressing these things, nobody's pushing for these things, and that is my complaint, really.
Thank you very much, Ralph. And I'm very sorry.
I'm just ending off by saying civil society is not doing the kind of activity that I want. I know that this is a small country, we have lots of problems, people don't want to come forward and so on, but civil society should be better organized and promote some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for that introduction and to giving us the background. I'm glad you did it while we were getting you situated. I'd walked the audience through that historical background. But you know, it's always good to have a second person and senior and somebody who was there to, in a sense, make it very clear that I wasn't imagining things. I did make that point in my long introduction as we were waiting for you. That the shared governance issue had really taken root in the society in a way that it has not since, probably not before, and that would have influenced Article 13, which I did suggest was a compromise, and I'm glad that you said that we were correct in that conclusion. Nigel, let me bring you in here. Article 13 of the Constitution. How important is that article in our constitutional framework?
David, I think one of the things that we need to do here is perhaps manage the expectations of our citizenry. Article 13 is, of course, beautifully constructed. Its aspirational aspect is second to none. The reality about Article 13 is that it is not directly enforceable in the courts. It's not justiciable. We've seen some promising signs in some recent decisions in the Caribbean Court of Justice. There are two cases that come to mind, Parve and Quincy McEwen, in which, particularly led by Justice Jamadar, he has been talking about the underlying principles of the Constitution that may not be specifically articulated in the Constitution, but are fundamental. And it's only in that sort of context, I suppose, that we can see it from a judicial point of view, it being, incorporated into interpretations of it. But the bottom line with Article 13 is that it is not justiciable. You touched on a very important point when in your introduction, which is the level and quality of education in the general population about the function and purpose of the Constitution. And I think we are very low on the scale of, we meaning the collective citizenry, of understanding, first of all, the role of a Constitution, etc. But to come back to your question, Article 13, wonderfully articulated, very aspirational. In practice, in Guyana, you just have to be in Guyana now to know that this has never been observed in practice. So at the end of the day, Article 13 has never effectively ever been adopted by any government since it was placed in the Constitution in 1980. And after the good work that was done between 1997 and 2000 by the Reform Commission. And Ralph has confirmed that. He said after they have done all this work, nothing has been done. So, and the most important one, of course, is the Human Rights Commission. So we have, if you permit me, we have this beautiful illusion of an advanced constitution. I'll just pick this one single example, and that is this. Under the constitution, several treaty rights are directly incorporated into the constitution, which means a lot of those rights, technically on paper, the citizenry are entitled to. But you can't go to the local courts to enforce any of those treaty rights. You have to go to the Human Rights Commission. And we have never had a Human Rights Commission. So we have this wonderfully modern constitution that doesn't say you have to pass the acts in Parliament after you sign a treaty purporting to give your citizens rights. You have it directly incorporated into the constitution, intended for the benefit of the citizenry, and the means by which you can enforce it has never existed. So that would be my response to your inquiry.
Ralph, let me bring you back in. And I'm going to ask you a more direct question here, because you both of us agree, and Nigel will also agree, that at the time of the reforms, at the end of the 1990s, the question of power sharing, and I prefer power sharing rather than shared governance as an old timer, the question of power sharing was very much in the air, and you suggested that Article 13, as it is constructed, was a kind of compromise. Is it safe to say that when you all were putting together Article 13, you all had in mind ultimately a power sharing form of governance in Guyana?
Oh, that was definitely a very strong tendency in the reform process. But at that time, neither the PNC nor the PPP wanted power sharing. That was the bottom line. That was what happened. There were a lot of people who wanted power sharing, but the two main agencies were opposed to it. And that is why we eventually brought forward all of these kinds of proposals to change, to implement new systems in the constitution, which Justice the president of the of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Adrian Saunders, said at the bar dinner that it was one of the most advanced constitutions in the region. And he had to have been talking about all of these things. I don't know that there are human rights commissions and these kinds of commissions in any constitution in the region. Um, so these are the things that he had to be talking about, and they're very important for us to think. There was something called a parliamentary management committee. As soon as the government changed in 20, the parliamentary management committee is comprised of equal members of parliament, with the speaker as the chair, with the speaker having no vote. So this was equal numbers of people. But as soon as the government changed in 2015, I don't think APNO AFC were quite cognizant or recalled the discussions. The people who were present, they did not recall the discussions that went on during the process of establishing these bodies. These were discussions between people like me and some of the older PNC, Johnson Barrow, one of them, and
Haslin Paris.
and Haslin Paris and a few others who structured these things. And I don't know if there is a parliamentary management committee now. And the thought occurred to me when they had this brouhaha in the National Assembly recently over the Natural Resources Fund legislation. If they had a parliamentary management committee, would that have been something that was not occurred? Would if there was a parliamentary management committee, would there have been such a deterioration in the behavior of MPs generally on both sides of the house? So those are the things that are missing and that can be still rectified and restored if the effort is made. But the opposition is lacking. I mean, that's my complaint, that these things need, the opposition has the power and the force to bring a lot of these things into focus. But it's hard work, For you to sit on a parliamentary committee, you have the four parliamentary committees, standing committees: natural resources, economic services, social services, and something else. These things require work and effort. So you can be, it is not expected. No one seriously expects that an MP earning five or six, $700 a month, having a job, having to earn a living outside of Parliament, will sit on these committees and spend the time that is necessary to make them function. So there's a whole range of reforms that have to be done. These jobs have to be full-time jobs.
Nigel, Ralph has raised the question there that this process has to be driven by the opposition. Where you stand on that?
The process of what? Parliamentary
The
reform?
process of the implementation, moving something like inclusionary democracy from beautiful words to real action.
Well, I think Ralph, the answer lies in a statement Ralph made earlier, which is that neither the PNC nor the PPP back then were interested in power sharing or shared governance. And I can't say that I have seen any signs recently of a change in their position. When I say changing their position, I know the current leader of the PNC, Mr. Norton, has agreed to that in principle, but I'm dealing more or less in the party's official positions. I haven't seen the sort of enthusiasm for shared governance, or power sharing, whatever you call it, that is there. What I have seen is a lot of resistance to dominance. But I'm not sure that discussion has moved from resistance to dominance to the architecture of how the future of the country will go. Resistance to dominance can take you to shared governance. Resistance to dominance can take you to full separation and partition. So the fact that you got resistance doesn't mean that you're going to end up with shared governance. You could end up with a solution that says, hey, we should find a way in which we can, peacefully coexist, but don't, not governed by the other. In answer to that, I don't think Guyana right now is exceedingly toxic. As a matter of fact, it's flashpoint. If you want to use a scientific term, the flashpoint at which it can ignite and explode, I think is very proximate. And unfortunately, the sort of strong leadership that you would have had in the old days, like Ralph, I think, spoke about Chetty driving that idea, that sort of very forceful leader that enjoyed, a primacy in terms of advancing ideas. That probably went away with Hoyt, and in Chetty it went. But if you want to go back to the days of Burnham and Chetty, we haven't had that level of leadership, and of course Rodney when he came as a challenger, we haven't had that level of leadership, and that can push an agenda. So many things are up in the air. So regrettably, I don't think it's up for the opposition to do so alone in terms of pushing this agenda. I think Guyana's reached the stage where the attitude to governance and government is very important. And you mentioned the National Resources Fund, and I just want to use an example. Every single member of the National Resources Fund has been proposed by the government. It has nothing to do with whether or not they are capable of discharging that responsibility. Every single member is a government nominated person. Now, unfortunately in Guyana, even if you are the most qualified for a post, the person who nominates you taints your ability. So it's never a question of capacity. If all the nominees for the National Resources Fund are persons who have been nominated by the government, and none of those that have been nominated by the opposition, assuming they're qualified, have been included for consideration, you already have a problem of confidence in the National Resources Fund. Board. They could do great work. I may or may not happen. I don't know. But nothing they come out with after this is going to be accepted. And half of the population, dependent on what sort of political noises precede any decision they make, is going to have a position on them. So governance is a little bit more involved and sophisticated and requires I don't even want to say a depth of character, but the requires a maturity. That's perhaps the more appropriate word. Requires a maturity to understand what time of day it is in the country, to understand where we are as a country and how it is that we collectively move this country from where it is to a position where it can uh, or all of its citizens can enjoy a better.
Let me bring you back in here, and I'm putting this question to both you and Nigel. You talk about the role of the opposition in pushing this process. What about the role of the courts? Um, uh, Judicial review. What does Article 13 really mean? What's the court's reading of Article 13? We know that the Natural Resource Fund challenged recently by the opposition. I think Norris Witter is arguing that the manner in which the Natural Resource Fund law was passed was a violation of Article 13. Um,
I might be in that case.
uh,
I might be in that case. But
oh, you,
let me talk about the role of the courts.
uh-huh.
I passionately believe in civil society, but as capable as a set of people capable of driving this and any other process. Now, I passionately believe in the court system as a possibility of moving the process forward. But we have some ideas here that really does not generally allow for the courts to judges are hobbled by all kinds of restrictions and so on. In 1987, Nigel will remember this and will know this case. There was a case of the Attorney General against Muhammad Ali that emerged out of the economic distress at the time when um, that involved Timal and the reorganization because of the financial situation when Gaisuko told Timal that they cannot raise they cannot give him a salary increase, led to a spate of litigation and so on. Emerging out of those was an attempt by the government to amend the labor legislation. And this reached the Court of Appeal. And Keith Messiah, who was then the chancellor, said, you can't amend the legislation unless you consult with the trade. You can't amend the constitution unless you consult with the trade union movement. And he relied on one of the principles in the constitution that everyone thought at the time was not justiciable. Messiah said it was justiciable in so far as the requirement for consultation is a legitimate expectation. It's one of the first cases that dealt with legitimate expectation, at least at that level. So Justice Messiah said that it was then Article 11, which required consultation to be implemented, to be, to be legally enforced. Now, there was another article called 32, which Messiah dealt with in the same case as a comparison to say, look, Article 32 cannot be enforced because it was an article for the that required every citizen and the society and every citizen to prevent crime and other violations of the law. It was impossible for that to be um, enforced. But Article 13 is a little different. And if you have a progressive judge, in the United States, you have these types of judges. In our system, you don't have judges who are progressive or not progressive. You can have them in England, like Sedley, Justice Sir Steve Sedley, who was a member of the executive of the British Communist Party just before he became a judge, and who turned out to be a very progressive judge within the structures, similar structures that we have. But Article 13 said that the objective of the state is inclusionary democracy, with particular emphasis that everybody must be consulted, providing increasing opportunities for the participation of citizens and their organizations in the management and decision making of the process of the state. Now, up to that, I would agree that there's no basis to enforce that participation of the citizens. But then it ends off by saying, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision making that directly affect their well-being. Suppose the government passes legislation affecting people with defective vision, and the Society for the Blind goes to court and say that this legislation affects us, the people we represent, and we were not consulted. I can see a progressive judge, a judge with some progressive instincts, enforcing that. So there is a big scope, in my view, for a judiciary that is progressive to enforce a lot of the provisions in the Constitution that can elevate the process of inclusionary democracy, that can make things better, that can bring relief to this. Why somebody, a member of civil society, does not go to the court and say, you are violating the Constitution by not appointing a human rights commission? Why doesn't somebody do that? That's the easiest one. The Constitution provides for a human rights commission. There is no human rights commission since 2001, 21 years now. The government has not, no government, there was another government. No government has moved to appoint a human rights commission. Why not? And which court is going to say that the government, that it's not our business? We can't enforce that. So there's a lot of space for the courts and civil society to maneuver and to bring relief and to bring some advancement in our situation.
Nigel,
Um,
is the court really the answer?
I, yeah, well, I have a slightly different view to Ralph on this.
Okay.
Um, both in terms of the example he gave with the blind site, and I mean his analysis is perfect in terms of the process. Yes, of course, you'll get a decision out of the court that says you should have consulted. The reality with Guyana is most governments pretend to consult. Back in the day when things were really bad between Mr. Burnham and Mr. Jagan, Mr. Burnham would pick up the phone and say, "Hi, Chetty, what's going on? I plan to do this. Was your view?" Chetty expresses his view, and the government proceeds. So that's a form of consultation. And my concern with the example that was given is that all that will happen. Most of the governments now are very sophisticated. They will go through some form of process of consultation. But assuming they didn't, all that will happen is the court will give a declaration that they'll strike down the legislation. The government will then go through some form of consultation, like we had the National Resource Fund. And they will then go ahead and say, we've consulted, and they will proceed to do exactly what they did before. Um, the other problem with our courts is that they're they can give declarations, but at the end of the day, you give a declaration and the government ignores it, as has happened in the past. Then what's the next step? Our challenges here are a little, to me, are a little bit more fundamental than the courts, and the courts are notoriously conservative in their approach in Guyana. And I think because our society is at such a position, there's a high level of self-restraint on the part of the judiciary about not wanting to go too far, because most of the problems that confront the society in Guyana at the end of the day come down to political lines, and we know what that means. And so any judge that is going to make a progressive decision is always fearful, or I don't want to say fearful, but is always concerned that, how are they going to be painted? Are they going to be seen as ethnically being defensive, or are they going to be accused of breaking ranks? And not that any of these things come into the decision making process, but that's the society we live in. So Ralph is very hopeful, and in terms of civil society, I will just share one experience about the impact of or the lack of impact of civil society. Back when they had the real crisis leading up to the constitutional reform talks, there was a body called the Social Partners, which consisted of the trade unions, the bar association, and the private sector. And this body was trying to resolve the political tension. And we went to meet one of the leading political parties to talk about, how we change the society, more consultation, etc., etc. And I never forget this. One of the very prominent politicians sat down and said to us, between the two major parties, we control 97% of the electorate. Who are you to tell us what we should do? And that is the bottom line with Guyana. If the PNC and the PPP have the same view on power sharing or no power sharing, or have the same view on what do you call it, shared governance, and if that position is the same, we are not prepared to share. You could talk until the cows come home. You can articulate the most advanced vision for the society. It ain't gonna happen. Civil society in Guyana is as divided as the country, and I understand that people have made glorious attempt to break that, but it has never been successfully done. And that statement resonates. Both the PNC and the PPP said to social partners, look, between us, we control 97% of this electorate. You can't come and dictate to us what the process of national development must be, or what form it must take. And that is where that's where the rubber hits the road.
Ralph, you're free to respond or rebut anything like that, but I want you to address this question. Um, does Article 13 mean consultation, or does it mean something broader than mere consultation?
I think Article 13 means something broader than mere consultation. Article 13 means you must strive for a partnership. Look at the words. Cooperatives, trade unions, also socio-economic organizations of a national character are entitled to participate in the various management and decision-making processes. This is decision-making processes. That means they must be involved from the very beginning. If you're contemplating doing something, you must engage them, work it out, and then come to an agreed conclusion. That's how I read it. That's what it means to me. And that was the general intention. That is the general intention. I'm not so look, we have a big problem, the same problem that Nigel mentioned about the two parties and so on. We have a big problem with what I call ethno-political dominance here in the country, and it's a serious problem, and it's a very great obstacle to progress in this country. All of us know it. All three of us know that. But we got to look like the shoot looking for the sunlight. We got to find sunlight somewhere. And that is what my argument is. Unless we find sunlight to open up this system, it's not going to be slow, it's going to be hard work, but you need to search for the sunlight to open the system. And if you go to a court and say, we have a human rights commission in the Constitution, and since 20 years now, it has not been established. The court says the Human Rights Commission has to be established, and the government has to establish it. And if you have a Human Rights Commission in Guyana, it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So you got to look for the shoots. You got to find these shoots and look for the sunlight somewhere, and let them trickle out to that sunlight, or else you will get no kind of relief from this ethnic dominance. I don't intend to throw up my hand and say, look, ethno-political dominance is going to kill us all, and these political parties are 97% of the population. I'm not going to accept. I can't live here and accept a situation in which I can throw up my hands no matter how difficult it is or how long it takes. I'm not. I'll probably not be here for the ending of it, but I think we should struggle. I promised Aubrey Norton last week that he can get a Nobel Prize nomination. Nobel Peace Prize nomination. That is how important this thing is. So I don't.
I don't speak for Aubrey. Can I just make this point? The prime minister of Ethiopia got the Nobel Prize. Look at where Ethiopia is today. Tigray, Eritrea. So the Nobel Prize
Well,
has lost its
Americans
shield,
don't
my
like
friend.
me to say this, but so did Obama, and he went and killed a lot of people in Pakistan. So
There you go.
And you guys introduced America here. Let me ask you this straight question, starting first with you, Nigel, and then we'll come back to Ralph. Nigel, you raised the question of the boogie man in the room, the elephant in the room, and that is our ethnic problem. At some point in a country like the United States, the court had to contend and confront that ethnic underbelly, that elephant in the room. Are we at that point where our courts um, um, should be bold enough to really confront that question in one way or the other? It's a layman's question. It's not a question that's grounded
Yeah.
in any kind of jurisprudence or anything. It's more a political question to legal people.
What I will say for the courts in Ghana is that they've always had to deal with political questions insofar as elections are concerned. So dealing with the hardcore political solutions. We had Justice Claudette Singh's decision back when she vitiated the election. The thing about America, 2 points I just want to make sure that you read is, all those civil rights decisions that were so progressive back in the 60s and perhaps early 70s, and all those women rights decisions, including Roe versus Wade and the rest of them. If you look at where America is now, the Supreme Court, there's a big debate about whether they're going to walk a lot of those decisions back. So, we have to take America in context. You can get the decisions, but you can also end up with a horrendously conservative court that can actually walk back a lot of those decisions. In America right now, there's a big debate about voter disenfranchisement in African American communities, etc. So, in a Guyana context, the issue is not so much where you've got institutional discriminatory laws on the books, which you had in the United States.
Mhm.
You had laws that said, whites and blacks use different sanitary facilities. Guyana doesn't have that problem. Like we all agree, we have a very progressive constitution on paper. Guyana's challenge is insidious. It is the people who exercise power that actually, in fact, carry out the sort of discriminatory legislation that was on the books in America, but they do that, in fact, in Guyana. So you can't go and say, oh, there's this law that says that African people can't get economic rights, or this law that says that Indian people can't go in the police force, or what have you. But the reality is the people who are elected, and let's assume democratically at whatever stage, it is not the laws that they pass, it is precisely how they deal with the well-being of the citizenry and the resources. The corn, as I like to put it, is how the corn gets shared. There's no law that says that the corn must only go to one group. But the reality is that in the distribution of the corn, it really does end up going to one group. So you can't go to the court and say, oh, by the way, X, Y, and Z. We're not a country that likes to collect data, but that will continue to fester. And Guyana's history is that at some stage, Guyana's history is no different from any other country. It can blow up. I don't know why we think we're different. Every country where you've had this ethnic problem and people have been shut out, at some stage something triggers it. And I know I may not be as optimistic as my senior, Mr. Ramkattan, but the reality of Ghana is the reality of Ghana.
Ralph?
We gotta just keep fighting for ethnic issue in Guyana is not going to end anytime soon. We need to strive for a situation where it is manageable. And I believe the process of managing that situation now is to ensure that all the reforms that we implemented 20 years ago are implemented and they work for the people of Guyana. That second thing is we must use our judiciary more. And I don't mind what problem the judges have now. Well, I don't mind it because I work before them. But we have a CCJ now, which makes a very, very big difference. And the CCJ has shown its progressive orientation in the two-term case, in the cross-dressing case, in other cases. They have shown an inclination towards a progressive orientation. And therefore, I believe that we need to do this kind of work to keep the ball rolling until the time comes when um, when we can bring when the bigger problem can be solved. We can't let fester. We can't let it fester. We have to just work and talk and try, make an effort. That's what we have to do.
Ralph, your party, ANOG, um, in essence, ran on that issue of power sharing, inclusionary democracy. What was your experience when you were on the campaign trail and talking to people about it? What kind of feedback were you getting from the people? And go ahead. Go ahead.
Look, people were very attentive. People were very attentive, but I got the impression that they were attentive because of politeness. That they didn't see us making any big waves, um, and therefore they didn't give us the necessary seriousness that we had hoped. People were attentive, they listened, and I carried a specific line. Unfortunately, all my colleagues didn't carry the same line because I told both PBP and PNC supporters that we are for you because if we win, your party will be in power, the party you support. And by supporting us, it doesn't mean that you're not supporting your party. It is supporting your party. I mean, it's a kind of line that I don't know if it's ingenious, but it was designed to bring more support. But it didn't work. But people listened to us. People turned out. They listened. They didn't turn out at every meeting we had because some meetings were not the right place and the right time and that kind of thing. But there is prospect for a third force here in Guyana still, despite the fact that we didn't do as well as we had hoped, and despite the fact that we thought that the AFC was weakening, and that AFC supporters would come over to us in larger numbers. Um, I think there is still space for a third party, and we're hoping. Well, I'm age is catching up with me, but I hope that the younger people in ANOG and other political parties are able to um, exploit the possibility. The thing is that the oil is going to make a very big impact. The oil monies not doing so as yet, but I think in another 5 years or so, with the funds being expended for various things, the oil resources will make a very big difference in the country. We cannot yet say how it will impact the ethno-political situation. We cannot say how it will impact the political situation generally. That's impossible. In 50 years' time, if we survive, the whole makeup of the population might be different. There might be Brazilians and Venezuelans or Caribbean people or whoever who might have a right to vote might make a very big difference. So we don't really know what will happen in the future, but I think in the immediate future, the oil resources will make a difference. And believe it, whether you believe it, the government knows that too, and they will make sure that the resources make a difference. They will make sure that it makes a difference.
How do you square that, Ralph, with the IRI poll that shows that only 1% of the population thinks that oil is a big issue?
But that has always been so, I mean, anecdotally, when you go out on the road, you travel in taxis and talk to taxi drivers and all this kind of thing, people are still not really enthusiastic. Because look, I traveled in a taxi the other day, short drop, start to talk to the taxi man about the oil. This is not long ago, a few weeks ago, when I'm in Georgetown and I can't move about easily and so on. I jump in a taxi. It's very easy in the city here. The oil had nothing to do with him. That's what he said. He said it got nothing to do with me, chief. I build in a house. I build in it myself because I can't pay carpenters. Now you tell me what the oil gonna do for me. So a lot of people um, don't. It has not impacted them as yet. Now I couldn't answer him. I couldn't tell him. I had no answer for him. But so a lot of people are still not really, but it will make a difference, make a big difference, I think.
Nigel, are you surprised that people are not thinking oil? They're not. It's not a big deal for them, and is that also concern?
I think it's worse than that. I just came out of the interior, Region 9, Region 8. There's nothing going on there for oil. They like the taxi driver. Oil has not made a single difference to their life. And in terms of the immediate future, they don't see oil making a difference to their life. Because at the end of the day, if you look at where the oil resources or the oil money is going to be spent, it's what 5% of the population that are getting the contracts, and the man in the taxi driver ain't getting that. The security guard is not getting that. You could perhaps improve the health system if you want, give them more roads. But the bottom line is that they're locked out, they're shut out, and there's no prospect of them getting in. So you go through this very, very you start distributing $250,000, $1 million, whatever. But everybody who receives that, if you ask them if it's made a tangible difference, the short answer to that is no. I hear what Ralph says, that the oil money will make a difference, but I don't think it will make a positive difference to the infrastructure, but to the lives of the average person, no. That's why you get that poll figure. I don't know how many kids coming out of university now at University of Ghana at any level have the same level of enthusiasm about the future. I say to the young lawyers in my firm, look, you guys got to get up and get involved, because this is your future. And I think the way that the economy is structured, um, unless you are training your people to take advantage of what's coming, they're left out. And a lot of people, because of poor educational facilities, just other challenges, they're just not going to get in there. So I have a different perspective on it. Um, and unfortunately, I don't think the model that we are adopting is working. And certainly, where we have our challenge in Ghana is, if we don't manage this ethnic thing, it is so delicate, and this goes south. Unless you got a Paul Kagame that's bringing you back, you in real dark territory. And we have never had the sophistication as a people. Even if you compare Guyana to Trinidad previously was a lot more sophisticated in the way in which they dealt with this ethnic and race issue. You never heard the sort of low, crass, vulgar resort to ethnicity, either on the campaign trail or in parliament or what have you. We are particularly gifted at being crude in the way in which we think about these things. And of course, if we think about them in very rudimentary terms, we can only articulate them the way in which we think about it. So, and I don't see any level of sophistication being infused into the society anytime soon. So I hear on paper that this is going to happen, but I think for the taxi driver, or the sewage worker, or anybody, This is not going to change. And unfortunately, and I say this with the greatest respect to the leadership that we have across the board, and I don't mean the political leaders of the parties. I don't think the level of discourse that takes place at the political level, both in and out of the National Assembly, is at all encouraging. It does not display any particular depth of thought, any sort of intellectual approach, any sort of progressive thinking or progressive approach. If you listen to Parliament, it is a cuss out every single time. Now, this body is what is making decisions on the future of our country. Um, Most parliamentarians probably don't want to go to Parliament because it's like going to the fish market. You get into this views out. You're getting a shot here, you're getting a shot there. You say whatever you say, but there's absolutely nothing progressive that comes out of it. The government has its majority; it will pass exactly what it wants. It doesn't consult. There's no, Ralph spoke about as an example the Parliamentary Management Committee. None of this stuff takes place. So how are we expecting progress if the highest decision makers in our country can't even begin to have a discussion, a constructive discussion, or an analysis before that discussion on how you approach the future of this country? So I got my one seat majority, two seat, or whatever seat number of majorities. I will pass what I pass. I end up with a National Resources Board in which no recommendations of the opposition have been taken into account. And let's see what happens there. I don't want to be negative in my predictions, but we will see what happens there. And if we don't have the tools to begin to collectively analyze and then find a way forward, inevitably what will happen to Guyana is we will go right back to the colonial system, which is those people that are the most economically resourced will dominate the society. That's where we're heading. However you twist it and turn it, if you think about it, the second the private sector in Guyana saw the specter of the size of the wealth and capital resources of Trinidad, they start screaming, oh, blue murder, oh God, this can't happen, we gotta have local content, blah, blah, blah. We don't have it. We don't have the capacity, and we don't even have the intellectual capacity to be able to address the problem, given all our commitments on the treaties, etc. Carl Greenidge wrote an excellent letter. Some person in the private sector, treated it with total disregard. So if we can't even begin to analyze and say, look, let's agree that this is the data we have. Let us begin to analyze it, and let us, after we've analyzed it, identify a solution. It ain't gonna happen. So you telling me that this National Assembly with the oil money and the presidency we have over the years is going to deliver to Guyana? Can't happen. It's not possible. Just cannot happen. The basics are not there.
And talking about CARICOM, Ralph, here is a question for you. I would like Mr. Ramkattan to address the context that Guyana is the biggest supporter of the CCJ, and the other Caribbean countries do not want anything to do with the CCJ. And this is a question from Lloyd.
Guyana is the biggest supporter, is one of the earliest supporter. Guyana and Barbados were the countries that went first. And Guyana had the experience of not having a court like the CCJ. Barbados had, because Barbados had the Privy Council. So Guyana is a big supporter, and rightly so. And Desmond Hoyt supported it, to give him credit and to give him due. The other countries don't support the CCJ for a reason that because of all kinds of historical ties, suspicious circumstances. One of the biggest arguments were that the CCJ will abolish the death penalty and a whole load of stuff. The Trinidad situation was caught up in politics. Remember, Pandey campaigned very heavily to have the CCJ situated in Trinidad, and the expectation was that the Pandey government would support the CCJ. As soon as in the process, the Pandey government went out of power, and the position, and Pandey then changed his position. The UNC changed its position. So all kinds of issues. There was a referendum in Grenada, sorry, in St. Vincent. Ralph Gonsalves, the prime minister, advocated the CCJ. The people said no. So there were all kinds of reasons why other countries are not supporting the CCJ. But I think we'll get there eventually. We are seeing, as Guyanese, we are seeing the quality of the decisions. I don't agree with everything they do. The cases that I lose they're wrong. I'm sure they're wrong, and whenever I lose, but you have to take the good with the bad. I think the CCJ is a great institution for us. It protects our democracy. Politicians don't support the CCJ when they are a problem. The Barbados Prime Minister, when he tried to refuse to give the vote to residents of the Commonwealth who were entitled to vote under the Constitution, and the CCJ ruled against him, he said they're politicians in robes. When in Guyana, when Granger was losing in the CCJ, he proposed that we restrict the CCJ only to constitutional cases. So politicians are not happy. Lots of politicians are not happy with judges anywhere. I read one man calling for the restricting the powers of the House of Lords, not the House of Lords, the UK Supreme Court, when the UK Supreme Court ruled that the Boris Johnson was wrong when he prorogued the Parliament, that he shouldn't have done it. So people are dissatisfied, but I think that there's no doubt in the minds of most Guyanese, certainly Guyanese lawyers, that the CCJ is there to protect us and is doing a fine job.
Kurt, I hope Mr. Ramkattan addressed your question also. You're asking why out of the 26 countries, only 4 have signed on to the CCJ. Nigel, you want to make a comment on that?
No, I completely agree with Ralph. We lost that additional layer, appellate layer, when we got rid of the Privy Council, which I at a Caribbean level, I agree with, in terms of we need to set our own jurisprudence, and I believe in the philosophy of having the ultimate Caribbean court here in the region. Absolutely, from setting our own jurisprudential, our Caribbean jurisprudence, and they're equal to others. Equal and better in some circumstances. I think a lot of the hesitation in those other countries, islands, we're the only country that's on the continent, is a high level of skepticism in coming out, emanating from a small society, about the ability for them to disassociate themselves from political matters. But I fully endorse the CCJ. We need it from a Guyana perspective, absolutely.
And I can't let you guys go without asking for your thoughts on the recent issue in the news relating to the appointment, the finalization of the appointment of the Chief Justice and the Chancellor of the Judiciary. The president of the CCJ weighed in on it. The Guyana Bar Association head weighed in on it. The system ought to be gotten rid of. What says you? Starting with you, Nigel.
It's easy to say the present system isn't working. I completely agree that the 2 persons that hold the substantive post should be confirmed. That's fine. What's the solution? We got to the position where we ended up with that situation simply because we didn't trust each other on the political level. So if we don't have a solution, it's easy to say, this is a crazy idea, let's go back. But if you go back and you don't have the support and consent of a significant part of the population, that is exposing your judiciary to some serious problems. Now, I understand the argument about independence of the judiciary when you're not confirmed, but that is perhaps a little bit more, it's not as real as it sounds. If we were a mature, sophisticated society, and I propose David Hines as the chancellor, And Ralph was in the other side, and he said, I'm not comfortable with David Hines. For the time Ralph says he's not comfortable with you, I believe, would step aside and say, look, I don't want to be chancellor if I don't enjoy the confidence of the majority of people to whom I will be delivering decisions. But we are not anywhere close to that basic society. Our approach is we got to have our woman or our man as the head of the judiciary. Just think about that at a basic level. That is such backward, retrogressive, troglodyte thinking that somehow there's a relationship between the person you put to head the judiciary owing some sort of allegiance to you. That is ridiculous. If you sit in there, if you argue like in the US, the political philosophy that underpins most of their judgments over their entire judicial career leads me to believe that they're not liberal or they're conservative or they're too liberal. You can have a rational decision on that, but you can't have a decision where I don't like A. The other side, we had this with Justice Carl Singh when he was chancellor. The opposition didn't want him, and the president at the time said, "I want him." Well, really, are we such a basic society that the only person that could occupy this position is one single human being? And are we lacking in such sophistication that, in those circumstances, if you don't want me, before the second I get the hint that you are not comfortable with me, I am asking not to be considered at all. But we don't have that. And that's the challenge we have, is because in our society, we are so basic. We're not even basic. We, it's literally as if we are still cave persons. That's my only comment on that. But I agree that both of those ladies are absolutely sterling. They should be confirmed. But I think you wrote the best article in this that I've read. You have to locate that decision in the context of politics in Guyana. And that's unfortunately exactly where we are. And we don't even have the basic sophistication to elevate ourselves and have a discussion over and beyond that.
Thank you
Sorry,
very
but
much
that's
there,
what I
thing. Ralph, you wrote an interesting column. Nigel talked about my column. You wrote an interesting column in which you suggested that the very consensus that we reached for may have may have worked against the process of coming to some consensus on these appointments.
Yeah, the idea was never that the government and the opposition should agree, because we knew what would happen, and what in fact is happening now. They would not agree. The idea was not that they should agree to the appointments. The idea was that we should try for a higher level of consultation, and we didn't have time to work it out. We didn't have time to figure it out, and that remained for the oversight committee. The guys in the oversight committee were not guided, they were not led, and they expected that we meant that there should be agreement. What they expected, I don't know, but they went and they agreed. When the thing came to me, I said, "Well, are you crazy?" They, they went back and spoke to Corbyn. But Corbyn had this concession in his back pocket. He's not going to give it up. So it was never given up. I hope the government, though, now does not. I don't think that can be changed. I don't think that we can change that anymore. I hope the government now does not take the position that for 10 or more years they did not have their appointees confirmed, and that they do the same thing now. I trust that they will not. And knowing the thinking, or having a suspicion as to the thinking, I believe that we will have a decision that that is that we're all looking for. If not, of course, I'll have something to say about it.
And as we wind down our program tonight, let me ask Nigel first for his closing thoughts, and then Ralph.
um, I suppose we got to continue to live in hope. There's it's not a particularly encouraging time in our history. But we got to continue to look for hope. I think using Ralph's example, you're looking for the sunshine if you're a root to see where you can sprout. But I don't have, and I don't want to depress you with my prognosis for the immediate future is not particularly optimistic. But we have to continue to live in hope and aspire.
Yes, and Ralph, of course, is a colleague of Martin Carter who said, "You wake up and you search for birds and sunlight." I remember those words. Ralph, your closing thoughts.
Yesterday, I spent 2 hours with a gentleman discussing his legal business and some other personal remarks. This morning, I received a telephone call from his son that he had died.
Wow.
His name is Katskan.
Oh, yes. Used to be in the PNC
Yeah.
treasurer. Yeah.
Well, I just want to use the opportunity of your program to express my condolences to Kaz's family and to say that, he remigrated in the 90s. I met him about the mid 90s. He was introduced to me by Winston Murray, who brought him in for some legal consultation. And we became friends after that. So it's over 25 years. And he was becoming active in the PNC. Winston introduced him to the PNC politics, and he became active in the politics. And our friendship continued and grew from strength to strength while he was active, while he was on the street demonstrating in the 90s and all that kind of stuff. So there are possibilities for all of us to understand that the gravity of our situation, as has been explained by Nigel, and for us to work towards its elimination. And there are many people who are working, including civil society, that have been made some critical remarks about recently, and I got some good cussing out about it. But there's potential for us to work, and if we can't reach the summit, that is to say, power sharing, let us continue climbing the small little hills. Bricks are going to fall along. We're going to stumble and struggle, but I started out my life wanted to bring socialism to Guyana. We haven't been reached there. I don't consider myself a failure. I wanted to become a great lawyer because I felt the only way that I can make the maximum contribution to Guyana, to bring socialism to Guyana, is if I perfect my skill. Now, I haven't succeeded in either. I haven't become a great lawyer, and I haven't brought socialism to Guyana. Well, I don't consider myself a failure.
And our brother Winston Jordan is in the audience. He says, "I concur with Nigel's view on the CCJ and the Chancellor, the Chief Justice and the Chancellor. Nothing wrong with the current process. Hasn't been approached sincerely." Winston, it's good to see that you're up and about and slowly getting back in the motion of things. Hope to see you in front of the cameras soon. To continue to make your contribution. And I want to thank my two guests here tonight. Nigel, of course, is a regular. I want to especially thank Ralph. I was a little bit hesitant because, these programs have a certain kind of branding. Ralph sometimes in his columns refer to us. But as you have noticed, the audience,
I'm a free agent.
You're a free agent. We've made a conscious effort in Politics 101 to really move the program to make a contribution in what I consider to be a particular niche. And that is to engage in informed discussion. I am a partisan person. I belong to a party, I have strong views and so forth. But I think that one should not be imprisoned by one's partisan outlook. One can still make a contribution to the society in critical areas. Over and over here tonight, Nigel kept saying, talking about our intellectual capacity. And I read this reference to intellectualism, not in the avant-garde sense, but in common sense, intellectualism to mean common sense. And that's what we strive to do. Thank you, Ralph, for coming. And I hope that you come back soon as we continue this series. I am extremely concerned, as many of us are, in our people beginning to lose confidence in our institutions. And while we want the society to move in directions that we would want them to move, we have to be concerned that we don't destroy the fabric of the society as we go along. And if there's one thing I learned from being a radical all these years, is that you can't be radical and stupid. You have to be radical. Thank you, my brothers, for coming on, and I'll be calling on you soon.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to the audience for staying with us. From your comments here, it is obvious that you are in sync with what was discussed tonight. Tomorrow night, Professor Thomas is going to be on. We're going to be taking our periodic look at where the economy is. 48% of the population said in that IRI poll that economic issues are the most important issues for them. Economic issues, not the politics, not the race thing, the economics. So we're going to be leading off with that tomorrow night with Professor Thomas as we take our look at where our economy is. Professor Thomas, of course, will give us the economist's view, not the partisan view. And see you tomorrow night with Professor Clive Thomas.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.